My name is Allie Hartman. I'm a horse trainer at Chris Brown Cutting Horses, and I'm 27, and I've been riding since I was 7 years old. So I started at 7 years old, and I did like a summer camp at this kind of western horse camp, and not a lot of riding happened. And then the following summer I wanted to do more, so I went to this place called European Pony School, and they did English riding lessons. So lots of kids on fat little ponies with little riding crops and that whole thing. Being able to engage with an animal on just more than petting your dog or hanging out with your cat. You're able to ride and form a bond and make something happen. So I rode from probably age 7 to 18 consistently all the way through. My focus was 3-day eventing, so that's dressage, stadium jumping, and cross-country schooling. I did that pretty much exclusively. Like, I never sat in a western saddle except if I was going to go on a trail ride. And that's all I was interested in. I had no idea that anything else existed. So cutting is a sport developed on a horse's natural instinct to work a cow. So they're bred for centuries to have an instinct, or what we call cow, and they want to sort of follow the cow's movements, and you train them to take a cow away from the herd and keep it away from the herd. It's essentially this dance you do with the cow, but it's all on your horse's natural instincts. You have to put your hand down and let your horse work a cow, and it's going to want to do it on its own, and you use your legs to help create something really beautiful. I think cutting keeps my interest because every horse works a cow a little bit differently. Every cow is a little different. So you're never able to predict what's about to happen, and there's never a pattern you're following, there's never a course you're riding, it's just you and the horse and the cow, and there's an infinite number of possibilities of things that could happen. So it's always new. I got the job with Chris because I'd actually been up here once before meeting this girl who was interviewing me for her assistant, and she was Chris's assistant. And so I met Chris then, and he was just very surly, and he was sitting in his chair in the barn, and he introduced himself, and that was that.
Chris was born in New South Wales, Australia in 1947. And when he was 4 years old, his family moved to a farm. On the farm was where Chris found his love of all animals, especially horses and dogs. His dad had a horse named Boney. Chris learned how to ride on him, and he taught him tricks and put on shows for the neighbors. That was just something that came naturally to him. He spent many hours on horseback. Once he was managing this ranch, he was introduced to a fellow who was very interested in the horses as well, and he offered to set Chris up with a tour of the United States to come over here to learn about the American quarter horse. He was so overwhelmed with what it was like here in the United States, his eyes just popped out of his head. He just fell in love with it. As time went by, he ended up with a horse trainer, and he was in California at that time. Chris went to work for him, and he rode a cutting horse, and he described that as once he did that, he knew that was the only thing he ever wanted to do for the rest of his life. Chris's approach to training horses in general is very different than anybody else I've been around. I've never seen anybody communicate with animals, especially horses, like Chris. The horses just hear him. His approach is to teach them, not to tell them, not to force them. He made it so that it was a pleasure for the animal.
I think Chris was able to bring out the highest athleticism from a horse because he knew what needed to happen, and he could make a horse super light, super fast by letting the horse be itself and just helping it along. He never got in its way. He never hindered any of its action. He would just let the horse be instinctual with the flag or cow.
Yeah. So
you like how he's looking though?
yes, very much. I just want him to decide, okay, I'm going to work for
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have to go fast to go to work hard.
Just he has to sit.
Yeah, he has to do what he knows how to do. So we just have to insist, and that's a way to insist without punishing him. And I think if, once he catches his breath a little bit, if you just do a couple of turns like that, I think you're good. Chris and I met as a blind date. We talked for about 5 minutes. He actually called me after a week and asked if I wanted to go out, and I said okay, and that was it. And then we got married 6 months later, and then we bought our ranch in '83. So we'd been married like 8 months or something like that when we bought this place. He made his living training horses, and not a lot of people get to do that, but I mean, that's all he ever wanted to do, ever. And he got to do it until he died. And so, how lucky is that?
Chris was so himself at every moment, and you knew it. He was very, very honest, very, very hardworking, very funny. Chris was very comfortable with who he was, and he very much trusted in what he knew with horses and how to help the horse not just be trained, but be comfortable and be happy and okay with the whole process. It was pretty amazing. What I read at his funeral summarizes my gratefulness. I'm not always able to convey what a gift that time was, and I'm just so appreciative for him and his time and his effort. So I think that's the best way I can say how thankful I am. I met Chris in October of 2019. Out of many of you here, I may have known Chris for the least amount of time, though that is of no reflection to the impact that he had. I want to share with everyone what Chris Brown has done for me. 3 years ago, I gave Chris a call about a loping position that I had heard was available. I rang him, and he quickly tried to get me off the phone, saying to call him another time as he didn't have much interest in training a new loper. So I kept bothering him, and eventually he invited me to come up and ride with him. He put me on his mare Cheese and let me work the flag. A couple of moves into it, and I was a total goner, totally obsessed with cutting, in love with the cow horse, and too eager to be tolerable. I worked with Chris and Cecilia loping all that winter, getting to know them, and one day in the spring he approached me and offered to really take me on, that he would try to share with me what he spent his whole life learning. In my eyes, he gave me the gift of a lifetime. To try to summarize the time that Chris has spent with me and what he was trying to teach me would be to minimize his life's work. Day in and day out, he would come up to the barn and patiently help me while I worked horse after horse. I'd do everything he said as best I could, and when I was frustrated or failing, he'd sometimes call me a gunsel. But more often than not, he'd say, "Just don't give up. Keep trying, you'll get it." He generously gave me his time and mentorship and only asked that I keep trying. Last year we worked on a difficult horse together that challenged me thoroughly as a rider and tested our student-teacher communication. I had to grit my teeth and have a difficult discussion with Chris, who decided I shouldn't ride it. With wounded pride, I went home and I wrote down what I wanted to say to Chris the next morning. I never had the courage to say it to him, but this is some of what I wrote. I consistently try my hardest, day in and day out, work to get better, regularly think and rethink the things that you teach me. As long as I have been here, my admiration for you as a horseman has only grown. You mentioned your frustration as to why I cannot do as you do, or sometimes as you say. The reality of learning is that you try and fail and try again. It is you who have worked so hard to teach me this. Even through struggle, I will dust off and try harder. We will work harder at our communication, and I will continue every day to work at becoming a better horsewoman. Though I never shared those words with him in the moment, that promise is as true today as it was then. Something that I learned since he left us was that he was so much more loved than I think he knew, and the profound effect that he had on my life was not a singular experience. Countless individuals have been changed and bettered by their time with Chris. What a remarkable, life-changing 3 years it's been. The woman I am today will forever be grateful for Chris Brown, the old Aussie whose most consistent praise may have been pretty good for a girl. Whose hours of dedication and commitment to the art of horse training and whose friendship and compassion will be cherished by all who knew him. I'd like to thank Chris Brown, a world-class horseman, a mentor, and a friend.
Chris just really liked Allie as a person, thought she was so nice, and thought she really had some talent. She just didn't have any information. So once Allie kind of got that idea that maybe she was progressing and maybe this is working, then the light bulb went on and she got really excited. The rest is history. She's just done so phenomenally well. So now I've made it my mission to make sure that I can do whatever I can to help her get going, because I think she has a lot to offer and done incredibly well, and I know she'll have a really good future if she decides to stick with it. And I think she will, and I hope so, because I hope Chris's legacy will continue through her.
One thing that I learned about both horses and life from Chris is that you just have to keep showing up and you have to keep trying and you have to keep your attitude right. Continuously remind yourself of what you're after here and continue to strive to do that. And I think that was one of the biggest impressions that he left me with, was just keep putting one foot in front of the other and keep showing up and keep, as our friend says, keep chopping wood. This place was so positive for me. All the horses were happy and all the people that would come were happy, and Chris was very forthcoming with his information and his teaching, and so you really feel like when you came here that you learned something. I want to keep that up. I want to keep having this be somewhere where both horses and rider can learn, and hopefully me as well. I would like to keep learning, and I am, definitely.
I got to live my dream. I'm grateful for that. And I think God played a huge role. So, God is good.
What?
Yeah.